Welcome to the Omar Alayli podcast, your go-to podcast for exploring the diverse fields driving space exploration and technology. I'm your host, Omar Alayli, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Christina-Ariadni Valagkouti. Christina is a space nutrition specialist at the German Space Agency who applies innovative nutrition science to ensure that even populations living in extreme conditions have access to nutritious, tasty food. With hands-on experience working with ESA astronauts and expertise in human metabolism, psychology, and toxicology, she brings a unique perspective on leveraging novel foods to enhance space food security and sustainability. Christina, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you for having me.
Christina, this is an exciting niche subject. Please share with our audience, what does a space nutrition specialist do?
Wow, okay. So, one of the things we have to do is to solve this puzzle that space nutrition is. It is difficult because, first of all, the foods that we have available in order to feed the astronauts are not the usual foods that we are trained in general as nutritionists or dietitians to use to make a diet plan. And also, the people that we are trying to feed, the astronauts, they do not have the same needs as the average person on Earth. So it's a very unique puzzle. On the one side, we have weird food, and on the other side, we have irregular requirements, and we have to match these things.
Okay, so can you share a bit about what sparked your interest in nutrition and more specifically in nutrition for extreme environments? Was
Yeah,
there something specific that motivated you to enter this field?
I always had like a deep respect for the people who are who are doing this, who go the extra mile, a little bit above and beyond, and the pioneers. So I guess I was always a little bit oriented towards that. But then I had to find a way to pair it with my nutrition studies, and the idea actually came when there was one of these tragic summers in Greece where we had a lot of wildfires, and there were these open calls to bring food. So most of the calls were for rice, for beans, that kind of shelf stable food that you can use like without refrigerating it. And I thought, okay, this is sounds like a solution, but how long can someone who has been through such a tough time can go on the same food, on this type of food? And I was like, I cannot believe there is no other solution. So I went down this rabbit hole of food for emergencies, and turns out that there is not much available. And then I thought, okay, like extreme conditions, the military. So it kind of all led to the most extreme environment that is space. And I was like, okay, if it works for space, then it works for the Earth too. So this is where we're going to go, the most extreme. Yeah.
So, okay, cool. From a broad perspective, what do you see as the biggest misconception people have about nutrition in extreme or space environment?
It is that it is quite primitive, let's say, that it is like with tubes or from toothpaste. I've heard a lot like, oh, astronauts only eat, yeah, like from tubes. Which is not the case. Like they have normal food, recognizable food, let's say. It just processed differently than the food that we have here, but it's not coming from tubes anymore. That used to be the case in the previous space missions, but now, yes, there have been some advancements. There's still a long way to go, but it's also important to recognize that it is not how bad it used to be, let's say.
So, can you set a stage about how is it like now on the International Space Station? How do astronauts get their food and the nutrition?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, when an astronaut is going to space, they also bring with them supplies,
Hmm.
and these supplies are being stored in the space station. So, the space station does not have a freezer or a refrigerator, and of course, the room that you have available to store food is very limited, and everything needs to be light because it will be sent to space.
Hmm.
So we need to find foods that fulfill these requirements, that they're easy to store even outside of the fridge, easy to carry, don't take up too much space. So we turn to these products. So that means we have food that lacks water so that
Hmm.
it can stay a long time safe for consumption, no microorganisms. Means that we cannot have fresh vegetables or fresh fruit. We cannot have specific types of meat, for example. So we are more oriented towards food that is a little bit sterile, let's
Okay.
say. And entire food groups are excluded, which can make things a little bit boring. Also, we cannot have any breadcrumbs flying around. It has to be food that is easy to eat. You don't take much time to prepare it because, of course, there's no kitchen and nobody can cook. It has to be ready, like you just open a pouch, you put some water in it, you close it, and then you can eat it. Or maybe you can spread it on some pita bread. They do not have actual bread because it's difficult to handle. So it's mostly these type of convenience foods, let's say, and this is what most astronauts bring with them. It's also oriented around, let's say, the cultures of the astronauts that go to space, which is mostly American and Russian, also some Canadian, but it's not, other cultures are currently not very represented unless there's like a very special mission with a very special guest.
Okay. So you're originally from Greece, so there's no gyros served at the International
No,
Space
no,
Station.
there have been no Greek astronauts so far. Like, yes.
Fingers crossed. Okay, so working with ESA astronauts in extreme environments sounds both challenging and fascinating, and could give you and could give us an insights that are not available in textbooks. Could you share a moment or an anecdote that experience which transformed or influenced the way you approached nutrition?
Yes, I can share. So I was working with ESA astronauts back in 2021 when I was a remote intern with the space medicine team. It was Corona. So I did not have immediate interaction with Thomas Pesquet, who was at his mission at the moment. But I did help with determining a way to measure how much calories he is burning, because the golden standard method is to wear a mask that measures how much oxygen you are consuming and how much CO2 you are producing. However, that is very difficult to use in space, and we would prefer something that you wear all the time. So we were actually trying to figure out a way to do this, and what other thing can we use. So we went for those watches that measure your heart rate, and they actually they can turn it into how much energy you're burning.
Okay.
So it was a very complicated puzzle, and that made me realize all the things we don't know that we don't know, which are very, very, they're very, very extensive. So that gave me, I think, like it was the best way to gain the insights about what happens in the human body, and like especially regarding metabolism in the space environment. The anecdote I can share is that we actually have a machine that scans a barcode that is on the food packaging, and then it actually sends us all the information about the food, how many calories it has, nutrients, and that kind of stuff. The problems start when they share food with other crewmates, especially, for example, from other space agencies, because we do not have this food in the database, and then we have no idea what happened and what they ate. So it's very difficult to quantify, even though we understand that it is important for crew cohesion and
Mhm.
like camaraderie. We don't encourage food sharing.
Many of us think about nutrition as simply fueling our bodies. In your experience, how does this become even more critical in environments like space or extreme terrestrial conditions?
Yeah, it is. Food is just so important. Like it has been since very ancient times that we humans have bonded around food or through food. And space missions are not different. Like for crew cohesion, like I said before, they need to share food. They need to all have maybe the same food, not like, oh, this is your stuff and this is my stuff. But this is not always possible from a logistics point of view. And the other thing is that, of course, after you've had a very long day, you're really looking forward to coming home to a nice plate of food that will be warm and it will bring you a nice feeling. And of course, if you have been away from home for that long, or if you're going through something very traumatic, it can bring a lot of comfort. It's why they are called comfort foods.
Hmm.
And they can help ease feelings of nostalgia. They can even give a prompt like, oh, this is what I used to eat back home, and then to share something with your crewmates, or yeah, the people that are around you that can help you cope with everything that is happening. So there's a very emotional, very psychological aspect to food that has been neglected in the space sector because it's above all a military operation, right? The people
Okay.
who are there, they are disciplined enough to eat the food that they are being served no matter what, which shouldn't be the case. It can really make or break the mission, the how willing you are to eat. And this is, of course, a really big problem that astronauts do not eat enough when they are in the space station. So it would really help them find their appetite and actually maintain their health and their well-being, and they can complete the mission more easily.
That raises a really good question. Now that tourist astronauts is becoming more popular, how is this affecting the whole dynamics of nutrition and dietary for to satisfy people who are like normal astronauts have been trained under really great like severe conditions and intensely to perform in space, while tourist astronauts will have at maximum 6 months training and then they're up in space. Is there something now you have to go back to the books and see what you can change?
I hope it will change things actually, because that's how innovation is driven, and especially with all the funding that can go into this for the commercial aspect of it, to satisfy basically the commercial aspect of it. I hope there are many things done because we go away from what I was saying earlier, all the discipline factor and the military operation factor, and we're going more into something that someone does for the fun, for the experience. So it's likely that there will be improvements in that. I haven't seen anything so far, but it's still doing its baby steps, right? What is happening now from ESA, again, it's an initiative from the European Space Agency, is that when there is an astronaut that has a preference for a specific food, they go to chefs and they ask them to adapt this specific food for space travel, to make it
Okay.
self-stable, to make it easy to consume, easy to prepare. So there are some initiatives like this. And yes, I do believe that with commercial space flight, even more money will flow into this and we will see more products being available just for the sake of having this product available, and not so much because it's like important to the mission, or yeah, it's just fun to have.
Okay. How much is the space nutritionist's input important in the this cycle of designing nutrition strategies for the astronauts?
Oh, well, astronauts have to be healthy above all, and they have to maintain their well being in order to complete the mission. And in the case of commercial space flight, possibly like for their safety to return safely back. So, yeah, it's very important that they stay properly nourished. So, you cannot ideally, you would not want to send food to prepare or design a food for space that is also not nutritious and not balanced. So basically, where the space nutritionist would come in would be as an advisory part of the process to say, okay, these are the requirements and these things are nice to have in your food. These things are a must have in the food. For example, a food, in order to last very long, it can have a lot of salt inside. Salt
Okay.
is really helpful for this type of yeah, processing, making it long lasting. But it is not very desirable to eat it at really big amounts on Earth, of course, but also in a space mission. So there should be someone who says to the people who are designing, this is great what you're doing, but please cut down the salt because it's not good for humans. So we would basically connect the final product of this process with the human that's going to consume it.
Let's circle back. I'd like to circle back to the mental health influence of nutrition. Could you shed light on how taste, variety, and the simple pleasure of a good meal contribute to astronauts' mental health? Do you factor that into your nutrition plans?
Yes, of course. We always, there's always negotiation with astronauts like, okay, I want to take this food with me. Well, yes, but you also have to take this food with you. So we really try to listen. We really try to understand what they want. Now, yes, about the taste, of course, if you rate the taste of a meal higher, it also encourages you to eat more of it. So we are more sure if they like the taste that they're gonna eat as much as they're supposed to eat, and they're not gonna give up in the middle of the meal, and then that would result in compromisation of the mission, of their health. It would make their recovery harder when they come back. So taste is really important for voluntary food intake, which keeps them happy and healthy. And then, of course, taste does not explain everything about voluntary food intake. There's also the consistency. It's the smell. It's the temperature sometimes. So it's the whole experience of food. Yes, it helps with voluntary food intake. And because we are not there to force them to eat something, it's entirely up to them. And it's very easy for them to just say, like, I don't want to eat anymore. And then what are you going to do? You are so far away. So we really rely on the mechanisms that they have, that, oh, I will eat this food and I will want this. So we do our best so that they want food that they have available.
Have you heard of any case of close to anorexia for astronauts in space?
Um, yeah, well, they all return with lots of losses,
Hmm.
especially in muscle and bone mass. And while, yes, of course, they eat less, but most of the loss is due to the lack of gravity and due to the lack of the signals, basically, that make our bones and our muscles stay strong. So nutrition would be more as a countermeasure to this loss, and not so much the cause, or like the cause of it, or
Okay.
because they don't eat that they lose.
So, what role does nutrition play as a countermeasure?
It would make, if we have the right nutrients, we can actually prevent this muscle and bone loss that they experience. So that means that when they come back, they can be quickly strong again, to be able to walk, to be adjusted to gravity. And of course, we wouldn't have to like evacuate them because they are getting very, very weak during the mission. So this is where nutrition comes in. And the other factor, of course, is that a lot of experiments are running both in analog missions and in space. So sometimes you would need to know that the changes you are seeing are not because of improper nutrition, but because of other factors.
Hmm.
So we really need to know that at least nutrition is standardized and is stable, and it's how it should be. And we can blame something else for this change, and we can actually focus on something else.
Okay. So
Does it?
this begs the question of, is the diet of an astronaut consistent throughout their mission? Let's say an astronaut goes to a mission for 6 months. Is their diet stable, or does that diet change according to their health? And like after 4 months, you'll definitely see certain degradation in body mass. That means automatically the diet switches to a different.
Yeah, it is a dynamic process,
Okay.
definitely. And there are like conferences, there are weekly conferences with doctors, with psychologists. So if these two specialties detect something that can be countered through nutrition, then yes, we have a chat and then we do our best. But also, they weigh themselves, the astronauts in space. It's a process, but they can do it. And then we can actually say, okay, you need to increase calories, you need to decrease calories. So it is quite dynamic, yes. And we keep track of multiple biomarkers.
Okay. In LEO and low Earth orbit, astronauts face unique challenges down to the cellular level. These changes are affected by microgravity and radiation exposure. Given the diverse makeup of astronaut crews in terms of age and gender, could you walk us through the most pressing nutritional challenges they encounter and how these issues are addressed?
Yes, it is a very personalized thing, of course. Nutrition, the right fit is different for everyone. And yeah, astronauts are no exception, of course.
Hmm.
So we do tailor nutrition exactly to how much they weigh and how much they burn. But also, some of the challenges that are caused because one is in space are also very unique. So, for example, the gut microbiome is very different for each person, and in space it is affected because of the radiation, because you're in a closed space with the same people, because you don't eat enough fresh fruits and vegetables. The gut microbiome uh, can cause you a lot of issues.
Hmm.
So of course, then we would have to find the right mix of probiotics and prebiotics for each astronaut, and that is one of the biggest challenges we have. Then there are experiments with antioxidants because astronauts are really exposed to radiation, and again, we would have to find the right mix of antioxidants because it is a great variety of compounds, and the right mix has to be found for each astronaut. And then there is, of course, how they are adjusting to space because they have some kind of nausea when they are floating until they get used to it. Some people are used to it faster. Some people are used to it a little bit later in their flight, in their mission. So we also need to factor in for these things. So yes.
Wow. Okay. And you work with ESA and DLR, the German Space Agency. Have you encountered surprising revelations about how the human body adapts or struggles to adapt to spaceflight or life in microgravity?
What I find very interesting about going in space is how the heart adjusts. It thinks that it's solving a problem, but it is not solving any problem. So, what normally happens in our bodies when we are on Earth is that the heart is used to sending blood against gravity to
Hmm.
our heads. And in space, this is not the case. The heart does not need to work against gravity. So it just starts sending blood to the head unnecessarily, and there's a lot of things going on here. There's a lot of fluid, extra fluid in the body, in the face, and I always find it interesting, like that, it takes some time for the heart to adjust, and then by the time it's adjusted, then it's time to come back to earth. So then you have the opposite problems, orthostatic pressure, like you get up and you're feeling dizzy and stuff. So the heart is trying its best, but it's always a little bit late with the adaptations.
Yeah. The last time we spoke, you mentioned you're managing human space psychological studies like isolation and bed rest studies. What
Yes.
type of studies are they, and where does nutrition fit into those studies?
Okay, so the better studies that are happening in the German Aerospace Center include people who are laying on a bed, 6-degree tilt, so the head is backwards, so that the blood goes to the head. And this is for 45 days usually.
Okay.
So they're not allowed to lift their head from the bed. They do everything laying down, including going to the bathroom, showering, eating. everything. And then we want to see if the countermeasures that we have, so for example, some devices that apply pressure to the lower body, or some exercising techniques that they do also lying down, if these can help with the muscle and bone loss that they are experiencing. Because with the muscles, if you don't use it, you lose it. So in that case is what I was saying earlier, that nutrition cannot be the cause of the changes we're seeing, because we need to know if the exercising regime works. We need to know if the device works. So nutrition is very standardized, and we need to be very sure that it is not the cause of change.
Okay.
And the other thing is, of course, that there is the ethics consideration, right? That we do not put the subjects in danger. So if we see someone losing a lot of weight, we need to intervene and say, okay, this is the cutoff and this is not going well. So we are going to make sure you are safe and healthy above everything else. So these are the two things that we would take care of as the nutrition team in DLR during a bed rest study.
Okay, cool.
And the isolation study, yes. So in the isolation study, people are not laying down. They are doing exactly what they would in a space mission, but they are on Earth. So it's a simulation. They have the same, it is an isolation mission. So they are in a compartment, they are by themselves, they have maybe some delay when they are communicating with the outside world, and they have the same experiments that astronauts would have to carry out. They have the schedule, they have the same conference calls. So it's a study to see basically how astronaut life can affect an individual and the crew. So there are a lot of experiments running in parallel with this, including biomarkers, psychological experiments, maybe some equipment testing also. So again, in that case, our goal would be for the nutrition to not be the cause of the changes that we see, unless we decide, of course, for such an experiment, right? But so far, this has not been the case. And then, of course, to make sure that none of the subjects is experiencing anything weird that can be countered with food, for example, some gastrointestinal symptoms, or that they are not eating enough.
Okay. So preparing for this interview, I revisited some of my biology and biochemistry texts, and I was intrigued by the complex interplay between nutrition, nutrient absorption, mitochondrial function, metabolism, and cellular and organ stress. With that in mind, could you elaborate on how these relationships influence astronauts' health, particularly in the context of extreme environments like microgravity?
Yeah, of course, everything is under stress when you are in space.
Yeah.
And the mitochondrial functions are indeed very affected. So the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, right? It produces energy. And yeah, they are severely affected by the radiation when we are in space. Also, the genes that are expressed are different, and a big factor when someone is in space is, of course, the lack of sunlight, because there is no atmosphere to protect us from the bad things that come with it. Yeah, people are shielded from it, and they have artificial light. The thing with the human body is that we get a lot of cues from the sunlight in order what kind of hormones we can produce. So this does not happen in space anymore. And the hormones affect the metabolism, and they affect the sleep, which affects the hormones even further and the metabolism even further. So it's really this kind of puzzle. It's a domino, and everything affects everything else. So yeah.
So how do you deal with those? Is there protocols that are in place to start to look at those, like research studies or protocols?
Yes, well, there are studies that have been done in order to decipher the mechanisms and especially what is affected, but it's still very immature, let's say. So what we focus on is mostly that they get enough calories, enough macronutrients, mostly, and for the rest, so far, yeah, it's mostly trying to decide where it's going wrong, trying to find out where it went wrong. We're not in the stage where we can actually have this targeted approach yet. Yeah.
Okay. Last year, NASA concluded a deep space food challenge that seeks to create novel food production systems that offer safe, nutritious, and delicious food for long duration human exploration missions. This sounds like a precursor for space food crops and farming. In terms of astronauts' nutritional needs, do you see farming in space in the future, of course, as a viable option to nutrition independence? Or will there always be a need for supplementing the astronaut or for supplementing the astronauts with packed Earth food and nutrients to feed our astronauts and keep them healthy and happy?
I hope we can move past that need.
Okay.
Because yeah, if we don't, we won't go much further. Like yeah, the use of the resources that we find wherever we go, and basically a self-sustainable agricultural system or food production system is literally the only way if we want to go to deep space exploration. Travel takes so long, and there's also no guarantee that the food would stay safe for that long. We really need redundant mechanisms in order to ensure that there is always food. A self-sustaining food production system is really the only way. When we're talking about the moon, it's easy to send food there, but
Hmm.
it would be wise to use the moon as a test bed, yeah, in order to test that we don't need to resupply anymore, and we can just utilize resources that are found, yeah, on the moon or on Mars. So yeah, absolutely, it is the only way.
So, as we look towards longer missions to the lunar surface or trips to Mars, what do you see the biggest challenges in space nutrition?
Okay, basically the the self-sustaining food system, because it would have to recycle a lot of things that are produced like waste. So the waste is waste for a reason. It's because it's not good to eat. And then turning this thing that you're not supposed to eat into something that you could eat and not harm you and even nourish you, let alone tasty and comforting, like we said before, this is a huge challenge. And of course, what worries me personally is making sure that this thing is so airtight that none of the bad stuff leak into the good stuff. Or if there is a leak, how are you going to figure it out before it harms you? How are you going to fix it? So, mostly from a quality assurance point of view, these systems would need to be like really 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 safe. There is no room for food poisoning. There is no room, like if you run out of medication, then what happens? So that would be the first step, safety.
Hmm.
This is where everything started also when we sent the first humans into space. This is how safety standards came into place, because we didn't have safety standards for food before, and then NASA kind of said, okay, this is not good enough, like we want to send people into space, this is serious. And this is how all the safety standards that are now every food company is supposed to follow, and they're obligated to follow by law. And this is how they came to be. So I expect even more stringent standards for these types of food production systems, and that would be the biggest challenge. This is where we would start from.
Okay. Have you seen the movie The Martian?
Yes.
So, from what I'm hearing from you, surviving on potato doesn't work, right?
It is a very realistic movie, actually, and I've heard
Okay.
also from plant scientists that it could work potentially. But yeah, he was surviving. He was not thriving.
Okay.
To have His plan was to come back to Earth, right, as fast as possible, which will not be the case for people who would go on a mission to Mars.
Okay. Can you explain the importance of analog astronaut missions on Earth? How do they inform real astronaut nutrition strategies? And what are the biggest insights gained from these simulations?
Yes, so analog missions, yeah, they are, yeah, the analog missions are just super important, I think, because sending people to space is expensive and it takes a lot of time to train them, and it includes specific risks.
Hmm.
So yeah, analog missions are really one of the greatest tools we have for space research, and especially to make space safer and more accessible. So yeah, they're a great test bed, and yeah, I'm actually very happy that DLR is now going to have one of their own. I also went myself on an analog mission a few months ago.
Okay. Tell me more.
Yeah, so I had my own nutrition questionnaire there. I was monitoring our appetite because it's easy to lose. So I needed to be on top of this. And I also wanted to have some data for later. What came out of this data is that what I was saying earlier, that taste is very important in the voluntary food consumption, but also it doesn't explain everything. The other thing that I noticed is that on the days that we were a little bit more tense or a little bit more irritated,
Hmm.
we would rate taste lower. And the satiation that would come from the food was also lower.
Hmm.
Correlation does not imply causation, of course. So it's hard to say if um, the the bad taste made us tense, or if we were tense before and we could not enjoy the taste as it was. So that really needs to be looked into further, because if the mood affects how we experience food, that can be a very useful insight, especially for isolated environments and extreme environments. And we can easily do this research in an analog mission.
Okay.
So I'm really looking forward to the next opportunity to research this further. But of course, analog missions are now not standardized, let's say. So there are many different habitats everywhere in the world, and each one of them has their own way of operating, their own standards. So it's not everywhere the same. And this would be the next step for analog missions, basically, to be a little bit more standardized, a little bit more homogeneous, so that we can do more high quality research, we can have more bigger sample sizes, and we can actually extract conclusions with more confidence.
Okay. Let me follow up on here. How long was the duration you went to in the last analog
It
mission?
was 5 days. It was
5 days.
like a pilot evaluation mission.
Okay. And usually analog missions are for a month or two.
Yeah, they can be like from 2 weeks until like, yeah, there have been some really long analog missions, but it's not common. Yeah.
Okay. And do people go there? Do you bunk with strangers, or is there studies? What happens if you're going with friends or people you know? Is this relevant or?
Most of the times you go with people you don't know before, because it's also important during an analog mission to check how the crew comes together, right? The dynamics, like from a psychological point of view, it's really interesting to watch that. So yes, there is, from a team building point of view, it's more interesting if you go with strangers, especially for the researchers.
Okay, so many of the challenges in feeding astronauts also apply to disaster zones or remote habitats here on Earth, like you said when at the beginning of our conversation here. Habitats like the research facilities in Antarctica, for example. In your opinion, how can space-focused nutrition research help us tackle food insecurity here at home? In other words, in what ways do innovations for astronaut nutrition trickle down to benefit people in remote or resource limited regions on Earth?
Okay, so again, it's a twofold solution that I can give. One is basically about the needs of the astronauts and how they can be matched, let's say, to the needs of the people on Earth. Because of course, yeah, the space exposome, all the factors that astronauts are exposed to in space, you don't find them here on Earth.
Hmm.
However, it like an accelerated condition that happens to the astronauts. So when they lose bone and muscle, it's like accelerated osteoporosis. So
Hmm.
we can see what we would observe on populations on Earth just on a shorter amount of time. Or, for example, the lack of sunlight, vitamin D deficiency. It's not as researched here on Earth in the populations. It is, however, very widely spread, and it is a problem for a lot of people. But we see it on astronauts, and it is very interesting on astronauts. So whatever we extract from there can be used on the people on Earth. So the needs, yeah, they are different, but like in a more extreme way, not in a way that cannot be applied. And then the other thing is, of course, the innovation from the food production point of view. So anything that works for space and will produce food that, like we said, it can be stored outside of the fridge. It can be consumed without needing a lot of preparation. It will stay safe for a long time. It is nutritious. It can keep you going. This is food that also is needed in emergency zones, in military operations, anywhere where there is a disaster. So the requirements for the food, I find that they are very similar. And if something works for the very, very strict limitations that we have in space, it can also work for other places here on Earth that have equally strict limitations. So, yeah.
Cool. For students or professionals intrigued in pursuing a career in the field of extreme environment nutrition, what career paths or research areas would you recommend they explore?
Yes, so there is no laid out path, let's say. It's not
Hmm.
very straightforward. And even I, when I was researching it, I found a lot of gaps, let's say, okay, where do I go from here? What do I do next? What I have noticed, however, is that the space community is really open. I know there is this stereotype that it's like really conservative and it's only like for people with really high IQ or whatever. But truth is that it's people who genuinely love what they're doing, and they want to be there. They're very happy about their work, and this is why it's not so gate kept. As long
Hmm.
as someone who approaches the space industry people is open to learning from them, they will also be open to learning from you. And that was my experience. I started volunteering in some space networks, especially yeah, I can mention the Space Generation Advisory Council.
Hmm.
I started learning from there a lot about the space sector and how it works and about the space agencies. It can be really chaotic, but really through this network I learned a lot. And then I noticed that the network was also listening to me. They were like, okay, but why are you a nutritionist interested? Where are you finding application of your skills?
Hmm.
And then I noticed that I was listening the network and the network was listening to me.
Hmm.
So that was my experience. If someone wants to work on it, they should start from volunteering, from being open, and from having faith that they will find like minded people or equally open people in the industry that will be able to provide them with resources. It is my dream to have a more well, no, how can I say that? It is my dream to have a more structured way of figuring this out and of
Okay.
ending up there. So let's see how that goes, I guess. But yeah, so far, volunteering has helped a lot, and talking about it, attending conferences, and yeah.
Cool. Finally, finally, looking ahead, where do you see the extent of our space exploration 20 or 30 years from now?
Whoa.
Yeah, from your perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I do expect more commercial flights to be in place. I do see more people, like how it happened basically with plane travel. In the beginning, it was like for the very rich ones and it was like very fancy. And now it's open for everyone and it's like a normal means of transport. Nobody like bats an eye if you have been on a plane like many times, like 10 times, I don't know, 100 times. It doesn't make an impression anymore. It's normal. So I do expect more commercial flights. I do expect it to be more like a part of our lives.
Hmm.
And I would also expect that the specialists and the experts in the space sector are communicating a little bit better what we do, so that the population can see the benefits that space has on the life on Earth, because it is a challenge now. I get asked a lot, why space? We have all these problems on Earth. So I really think that in 30, 40 years, because there is an effort towards this, um, towards solving this problem, that more young scientists will find ways to communicate, to connect with the public, and to explain why what we do is important and how it can benefit everyone. So yes, interest in space going up, investments in space going up,
Hopefully.
more commercial flights, more cultures being involved, more accessible, more open, and more part of our lives in general. Yeah.
Do you have any favorite science fiction books or movie series, anime, manga?
Wow. Okay. I really liked Dr. Stone
Oh
from.
yeah, Dr. Stone, yeah.
You
Science.
know it, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah,
It is quite, I don't want to say realistic, but I don't have another word. It's not realistic because it would take way longer to do all these things, but now very credible. Maybe that is the word I'm looking
yeah.
for. Like it's
What was his catchphrase? Be amazed? No, yeah, anyway, forgot about it.
I watched it in Japanese, so I'm not
Okay,
sure, with subtitles. So
okay.
I'm not sure, but yes, I like Dr. Stone, and I did enjoy The Martian, and I also read Hail Mary. It's from the same author. He
hmm
also puts a lot of effort into writing something really credible, really, yeah, like that it could happen. They put a lot of effort into it. They don't just give explanations like yeah, it's magic or whatever. There is some science based basis on the things they say, which makes it nice to read.
Yeah, one book, one manga actually that
Mhm.
I liked, which also have influence in space nutrition, is called Knights of Sidonia. It's by Tsutomu Nihai,
Okay.
and in it, the population on an interstellar spacecraft that is doing interstellar travel have changed genetically so that they do photosynthesis rather than consumption of food. So that
Okay.
I was like, okay, that's maybe that one day, 100 years, 1,000 years from now, will when we travel across systems, we might have to change ourselves and hack our body.
There is a book about this. It's called The Next 500 Years, and it actually describes which genes we might need to edit in order to travel in space. And it is not science fiction. It is science. So yeah.
Cool. So before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience? Something you are doing or working on that we should look forward to?
Wow. I said everything.
Well, I'll say you should go to visit Christina's website. She has also an amazing booklet that describes her work and what she's passionate about and what she does. I'll put the description of your website in the
Thank you
description of
so
the
much.
video.
Yes, thank you
Christina,
so much.
it's been great. It's been great having you here, and it's a pleasure and an eye opener. Thank you for joining us. And to everyone listening, this is Omar Alayli with the Omar Alayli podcast. Thanks for joining us and keep exploring.